The rest of you guys, anybody that's in the Tuesday lab is invited to come to lab today. We will be walking a little further today, and it's kind of muddy. Well, at least the fun parts are muddy, so I would encourage you to definitely not wear your fancy shoes. Rain boots are probably the best thing. Okay, we're going to be in some really neat amphibian habitat. We can do a little bit of mucking around, and we'll get those final 3 cameras out. And already I'm wanting to go out and check the cameras from yesterday because I know that they're going to be used. So just a little bit about lab. Okay, let's see here. So the reason that we pick up here right after Bio 120 is because you'll notice I'm teaching an evolution class in the fall, and genetics is a pre-requirement for that class because you can't understand evolution until you understand genetics, okay? You can't understand, and I'm going to tell you the truth. When I was in your shoes, I was here to learn about animals. I could give a flip about cells or DNA and that crap like that. I just wanted to know about animals. But now, at a ripe old age, I now realize you really can't understand animals and behavior and morphology and evolution until you do understand those little small-scale things, okay? In fact, last night I got my second Moderna shot, right, on the little tour today. What do you guys know about that vaccine, the Moderna vaccine? I've heard a lot of people saying, I don't know if I want to get that. It's going to mess with
my... You have to have at least 2 vaccines.
Okay, you have to have 2 vaccines 4 weeks apart.
That's all I know.
95% effective. What's in the actual vaccine? This is the first time this has ever been used in the vaccine.
mRNA.
mRNA. Okay. mRNA. So in that, this is kind of scary, right? People are like, oh God, this is going to screw up my genetics and my DNA. But you guys, you took 120, you guys have the luxury of being educated. You should be able to look at this and say, no, actually, it's no problem. Because what is in a normal, like say like a polio vaccine or something, the actual virus, there's a weakened or dead virus in there, okay? This will come back around to zoology, I promise. All right, okay, remember this, the central dogma. DNA to what? To protein. Remember this inside your cell? The DNA is important only because it codes for proteins. Right? But what do we have in between inside the cell? The DNA is not used directly. Okay, let's back up. What's the organelle that makes proteins? Ribosome, okay. Ribosome is the, remember the thing, large unit, small subunit. It makes this long chain of amino acids that folds into a protein. Those proteins are what makes your body work, what makes your cells work. They're signals that go between cells. They are transporters that bring things in and out of the cell. They are hormones. They are structural proteins. They are everything that really chemically, anything that functionally, activity that happens in your cell happens because of these, right? But what does the ribosome use as a recipe to make the protein? It's not the DNA, because where's the DNA? The DNA is inside. It's got this little pores in it. Where's the DNA always reside? In the nucleus. Where does the ribosome always reside? You get a hint, hint, it ain't in the nucleus. It's out in the cytoplasm. Right. So what goes between the nucleus and the ribosome? The mRNA. Oh God, I only have 3 letters and I misspelled it. mRNA. Right? So this, right, You remember this, right? Remember we had this moment where we were learning together in Y120, 600 years ago, right? DNA to mRNA to protein. This mRNA, this is what they injected into me, into my arm. And that's kind of scary at first, but you know what they normally inject? They normally inject a virus. Here's this virus. Scary. You ever see these things? They look like weird aliens. Good Lord. Guess what's inside of there? DNA. See, do it again. What ends? They normally inject the virus. The virus dumps its DNA in you. Your body then makes RNA copy of it, and then your body makes proteins. We're just jumping to the middle part here. We're skipping the virus part. We're just injecting the mRNA code, copy of the viral DNA, so that our body will make a protein with antibody that gives you immunity.
Is that why snake venom is similar?
Actually, snake venom is very similar. Snake venom, what it does is it causes your body to produce antibodies that then will basically neutralize the snake venom. Because guess what? Snake venom is made up of proteins, all kinds of enzymes that break up your blood cells and break up your nerve cells. And, right? I'm telling you guys, it's amazing how often anything in biology comes down to this story. DNA and RNA to protein. It's unbelievable. And this is no different. We're about to talk about evolution, right? Evolution is a story about DNA, about the central dogma. Okay, we're going to get that to there. Now, this is something we really kind of glaze over. Remember P's and Q's? What is it? P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared equals 1. Remember Hardy Weinberg? Okay, I appreciate your honesty. You're like, no. Does anybody, maybe you guys didn't get to it. 120 was like a total dumpster fire.
I remember it from evolution with you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so if you guys didn't learn about it, then this slide is pretty much just useless, right? But this, with this Hardy Weinberg, this is a principle that says that allele frequencies will not change in a population. So if we know the frequency of dominant to recessive alleles in a population, and we go flash forward 1 million years in time, it will be exactly the same, right? The genetics don't change in the population if these things are true. The population will remain in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium if there's no mutation, if there's no gene flow, if there's totally random mating, if the population is infinitely large and no natural selection occurs. Okay, so if these things are all true, the population genetics remain exactly the same. Okay. So if the assumptions are met, allele frequencies do not change over time. Okay. Flash forward to the definition of evolution. What is evolution? Evolution isn't monkeys turning into people. It's not it's not fish turning into amphibians. Broadly speaking, the most succinct and precise definition of evolution is the change in allele frequencies in a population over this time. In the time, we're talking about a span of generations. Okay, so how much time are we talking about? It depends. If you're talking about viruses, you may be talking about days. If you're talking about elephants, you're talking about decades, right? So as generation to generation, the allele frequencies in that population change. That's what evolution is, okay? So it's simply, we're talking about the genetic makeup of the population changing over time. Okay? So obviously, the relationship is no evolution, evolution. If the population is in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, it's not evolving, okay? So therefore, what are the things that cause evolution? What causes change in the genetic frequency of a population over time? What are those things? Survival rate. We go back to this one. What are the things that cause genetic
Survival rate in the environment.
Yup, that's that one, natural selection. Well, mutations, yup, gene flow, these things that cause if you just take the no away, basically. You're violating the Hardy-Weinberg principle causes evolution. Okay? And we're gonna go through each of those things and talk about how it leads to genetic change and how it leads to evolution and talk about examples, okay? Real brief review about alleles, right? What is an allele? What's an allele?
Different forms of the same gene.
How dare you just read that off like that? I'm giving you a hard time. I always do this too. I'll put it up there and then I ask people. Explain it to me like look at it from a different angle. How else could you say that same thing? Like, well, give me an example. Well, except for your own examples.
Different forms of a trait. Like, well, it said the ears, like hanging or not, or.
Okay, what's some other examples of different things that have different alleles?
Blue eyes, brown eyes.
Say it again.
The eye color.
Okay, eye color, brown, blue. Well, there's there's green and all that, but really there's bluish family of genes, and we see that's pretty complicated. Yeah, Princess.
It's the side characteristics of the organism,
Of which is?
of the organism. How you
Yeah. Okay, so all these characteristics, and remember, when we talk about DNA, we have 2 copies of every chromosome. We're diploid. We have 2 of the same. So for any given trait, we have 2 copies of the code for that trait. So for eye color, we have a mother copy and a father copy. Okay. If the mother copy and the father copy are different, then they have different alleles. Okay. So we have, this is basically genetic diversity. So when we talk about allele frequencies changing, then if we see that as time progresses, the proportion of people in a population with blue eyes changes, then that's evolution, right? That meets our definition of evolution, okay? And we said, what is a gene? Okay, here's one allele. A lot of this is just simply terminology. Allele 1, allele 2. If this is a long chromosome, relative to the chromosome, what is a gene? What's a gene? Come. What do you think, Sam?
So like the area of a chromosome that determines like which like it can have different rules.
Okay. So it's part of the chromosome? Yeah, you're right. Chromosome is just a long, long string. We might have a gene from here to there. That's one gene, and then here's another gene. And each gene codes for one what?
Protein.
One protein. One gene, one protein. Okay, now again, you can have, here's the maternal copy, and over here. I have to draw all this stuff out. I didn't understand any of this until I started teaching people like you. And I started to draw it out, like, oh, okay, we think of this as like an intangible thing, but they're real, it is stuff. All right, here's the same gene, one, maybe a different version of it, okay? So those proteins, what do they do? Oh, yeah, here's another way of looking at it. Here's the chromosome. This is packed up really tightly during cell division. Here's that same chromosome unwound. Here's that long strand of DNA. And one gene would be like from right here. And it's the code for one protein. Here's another gene, another protein, so on and so forth. Okay? So they do everything. Again, enzymes. Whether you can drink milk comfortably. I mean, everybody can drink milk. It's just whether or not your shorts are safe afterwards. Whether you can you can metabolize a given amino acid, and therefore you don't have maple syrup urine disease, or these are receptor proteins, right? So this one is the story of type 1 diabetes, right? If you don't have the receptor protein for insulin, then you have diabetes, right? Antibodies, you're all immunity. People have become really interested in immunology here lately, right? This new variant coming, you guys have heard of these variants of COVID? Coming out of South Africa, Brazil, Los Angeles, right? Why are they different? Because their genetic makeup is different. So therefore, our antibodies may or may not be as effective at eliminating and clearing that virus from your body. It's DNA, it's all proteins and DNAs, muscles, hair, and nails. Whether you have curly hair or straight hair or no hair or gray hair, what blood type you are, right? Whether your blood cells are shaped like a nice lozenge shape or they're shaped like this. You guys heard that Hank Aaron died. He was a really big spokesman for sickle cell disease, right? That's DNA. But all these things, I hope you guys will, obviously you could spend your whole life studying all of these proteins and everything, but here I just want you to understand, so what's the big deal? If you change allele frequencies in the population, what's the big deal? Well, all of these things can change, right? Given the change in the allele frequencies. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal, okay? Anything that is controlled by DNA can change due to evolution. And in zoology, right, I mean, here you have your typical cheetah, and then one small genetic change in the DNA can result in a very different color pattern. And they have, now the amazing thing where we live in 2021, we're now starting to understand the specific part of this huge long chromosome that changes, that results in this versus that.
Oh, I thought it was a wildcat or something.
Same exact species.
Oh,
One small change in DNA, a mutation, a random chance mistake made in the DNA results in this versus that. Right? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? It depends on the environment, right? A lot of it depends, we're going to see, depends on what's sexy. It's not whether you're fast or strong or smart or whatever. If you're attractive to the sex that picks and chooses, then that's really good, right? That mutation is a really good thing. Okay, so another example. This is if you have a child, your child will be tested for this disease, cystic fibrosis. It's actually pretty common in Caucasian populations. Here is the chromosome, human chromosome number 7. If you look from here to here and you pull out the DNA, this is what you get. Right? Here is that DNA. If you then translate that gene into a protein, here's the protein. Right? And when that protein folds up, we'll see that this part is here. These two little things are there. Those two here. See the correspondence between the gene product and then that folded protein. And guess what? This protein is the wrong shape and it embeds in the cell membrane along the airway, I guess the trachea. If it's misshapen and it doesn't work properly, it doesn't transport chloride ions properly, and the people will have a very difficult life. They have to wear a concussive chest vest that loosens the mucus from their airways, get lots of infections. Disease is caused by, and any disease that's a genetic disease has the same story. Disease is caused by a misshapen protein, which is caused by a change in the genetic makeup, okay? Cystic fibrosis. What are some other genetic diseases that follow the same story? Type 1 diabetes, I said. What is another disease you can inherit? At birth, you are plagued with this disease. Yep, type 1 diabetes, what else? Huntington's disease, sickle cell, what is it?
Down syndrome.
Down syndrome. Yep. So Down syndrome is an entire chromosome is represented not twice, but 3 times. And so a little bit extra of whatever protein product is made by that, it's the 21st chromosome. And so there's more protein than average, and that causes different developmental differences. Yeah. So it's very interesting. I'm telling you guys, 120 was difficult to struggle through, but all the medicine evolution comes down to this. Okay, so here are these things, these actual, I call them agents of evolution. These are the mechanisms, the things that cause a population to change over time. Okay, and I'm going to go through these. I have a little asterisk here. We're going to cover this last. This is arguably causes the most change in a population's genetics. Okay, they all change. They all cause change. This one is probably the most significant one. Okay, anything that's adaptive was created by natural selection. This is Darwin's great contribution. He figured this out. Really brilliant guy. Okay, so let's just look through. I don't know if I have a slide for mutation, but how does mutation cause evolution? How does mutation, or what's mutation's role in this story?
It produces a new variety by accident almost, or by chance, I guess.
Like, when in what part of a cell's life would a mutation happen?
In the embryo.
So if you're just a cell doing your thing, when would a mutation likely pop up, you think? Or you said it is a random and it's a mistake, right? It can be a happy mistake, most of the time it's not. But when, I guess I'm asking a tricky question, but when the cell is copying its DNA, it just makes a mistake, usually. Or it could be that it's just, you're walking down the street, bald head gets zapped by UV, and it changes one of the little nucleotides in DNA. Okay, so let's say like this, we have population, this is time 1, this is time 2, okay, and we have these different alleles. We have a little allele, okay, some members of the population have a blue allele, and we have a green allele. Other members have this. Blue is much more common, right? And then down the road, blue is still real common, more common than green, right? But all of a sudden, before you know it, we have a red allele. Where did it come from? Just a mistake. We're making a copy, and instead of writing down blue or red, or blue or green, we wrote down red, okay? Now, is this a huge amount of evolution? Is that a big change? No. And what's likely to happen to that? It may not be well adapted to its environment. Maybe its behavior is strange. Maybe it has a weird appearance. Maybe it's the mutation makes it more susceptible to disease. Usually, if you just get into DNA, you're just tinkering around, you're making changes, it doesn't usually end well. The story doesn't usually end well. But say for example, how many folks in here have blue colored eyes? Okay, so you guys are all cousins. Okay, there was one mutation, they believe. They took people from all around the world that have blue eyes, and they looked at their DNA, and they were able to trace that back to a single ancestor, right? And they were born, and just random mistake, their eyes were blue, right? And that was a mutation event. Now, what probably happened was, I don't know, think about way back in Northern Europe, somebody's eyes turned blue. What's likely to happen there? Maybe it's like, think about way back then, and maybe just like, this person's a god, right? So they get all the breeding opportunities, right? And so through time, that allele has increased. But mutation just caused that variation. It doesn't cause a lot of change, it just creates different options, okay? Gene flow. Gene flow. And you're going to see there are two that are very easy to confuse. There's genetic drift. Focus on this too. Genetic, well, I'm going to gene flow because this is the first one, versus genetic drift. I mean, somebody did a good job of naming these. Genes, genetic, flowing, drifting, right? Gene flow is about movement of individual organisms, okay? So, time one, we have all red alleles here in this population, okay? And we have all blue alleles in this population. Now, what is, okay, I guess we should probably step back and say, what's a population? It's just members, these are all the same species, right? They're all interbreeding with each other potentially. So all the male deers can breed with all the female deer and produce fertile offspring. Over here, same species, so if I took this male, well, in fact, this is what happens. This female suddenly can move from this population to the other, and when she comes over, she breeds with a male from here, and it works. They are the same species. They're reproductively compatible, right? Why is this an example of evolution? Why is this?
Up the alleles.
Yeah, she brought with her the red allele, which didn't exist in the population before, right? So that's change in genetic makeup of this population over time, right? Because now suddenly, and this does happen, this is kind of a corny example, but we see this happen quite often where animals maybe get on a raft of wood and cross from the mainland to an island. And if there's an existing population of that species, they bring new alleles with them. Maybe during a storm, migrating birds, a group of them gets blown off course, and they get, no, gene flow only works if there is an existing population, okay? And then they bring a new allele into that population. Okay? So this is about movement of individuals. I think we can set it this. Individuals move to an existing population. And bring their alleles. Bring new alleles. Okay. Think about how often this has happened in human populations. Up until probably, well, humans have moved around quite a bit, but not like they have in the last hundreds of years, right? There's been a lot of mixing of unique, obviously the human population in the world is all one species, but there have been really unique gene pools built up over time in Asia and then North America and then Europe and then Africa. And then when people started moving around, right, they're mixing and matching, sort of. This tends to take unique populations and blend them together, okay? Here we had red, there we had blue, and then we sort of mix them together and make a purple. Okay? Tends to make things less unique. Another mechanism here is called non-random mating or sexual selection. Okay? And what this says is basically certain genotypes or certain alleles are preferred. Okay? So that usually it's the female that picks and chooses, and the female prefers one genotype over the other. That genotype gets to have more babies, so what's going to happen to that genotype over time? Right. At the expense of the other genotype, right? So we see that genotype increases in frequency. Okay. So we see an increased frequency of alleles found in reproductively successful individuals, and other alleles are just removed from the population, right? Because guess what? Unless you just live forever and ever and ever, if you don't have babies, your alleles will be removed from the population, right? It's all about reproduction. It's all about passing your genes on for future generations, okay? I was at a scientific conference one time, and oh wait, yeah, I saw this guy. He was really very helpful thinking, just randomly bump into people. No, but I mean, this kind of proves the point. It is not random mating, right? What happens instead, and I'm telling you guys, we tend to think of like we have a type. We look in a magazine and it tells us who is a good mate for us. We have built-in amazing mechanisms for choosing the right person, right? This is like, you ever read about this experiment where they gave females a bunch of white t-shirts that had been worn by different males, and they asked them to sniff the t-shirt, never see the man, and rate them based on attractiveness, based on the smell of the t-shirt. And they'll pick the male that has the perfect symmetry in their facial features. They'll pick the male that has the complementary immune system. If her immune system is like this, and his is like that, it's not a good match because then the baby's not going to get anything new. But if his immune system complements hers, she thinks that shirt is really attractive. Right? That's cool stuff. I think that's really neat. That's love at first sight, right? It is. First smell, right? What is the peahen? Peacock. They're all peafowls. What does the peahen appreciate about a male? And this is not like a counting thing, but you can go into these things are wild animals. They don't just live at petting zoos, right? And you can go, and if you gather up all the little pea chicks and you determine paternity, you'll see that the more eye spots on the tail of a male, the more babies he has. There's a statistically significant positive relationship between the number of eye spots that he has and the number of babies he has. Right? That's cool. What's that going to do? Well, what's that going to do? Hello, right? This is what it has done. It has created this amazing species, right? What does sexual selection do? What does sexual selection do? Let's see. Why do elk have antlers like this? I promise you it's not because it helps them to run around or get through the forest. Why do elk have gigantic antlers like this? It's real simple. Well, check these guys out. This, an extinct species.
It looks like a bigger.
Look at this thing. What in Sam hell? Why do they have antlers like this? It's because they can fly with them? Because it was sexy, right? And because it was sexy, you get this like arms race. The bigger and the bigger, the bigger antlers, right? Look at, I mean, just go home and look up male, let's see, male, oh, here's the best one.
Wait, don't females also have antlers?
Have you? No, not antlers, horns they do.
Oh,
No, horns, yes. What about this one? Right? You guys ever see bowerbirds? These guys are dedicated to their craft. They build these giant, these are awful pictures. Maybe I need a picture of the bower. Not the bird. Yeah, there we go.
Are those scattered flower petals?
They do flower petals. It depends on which species they are. This species obviously likes the white color. Some do blue, some do red. They'll go and gather for miles and miles, everything that's red, and they'll make this beautiful little hut, and they'll lay it all out. Is that because, again, this is not because this is a reflection on his ability to raise a baby. It's just about like his pad, right? Well, how else do you explain this? Besides the fact that like one female decided that was attractive, so then it's like all the guys are like, oh crap, now I'm going to start building these things, all right? Amazing. Okay, so that is sexual selection, non-random mating. Okay. And then we've got this one, genetic drift. This one is, again, focus on differentiating it from gene flow. With genetic drift, this has to do with randomness, okay? It's a random selection process, okay? Winners are just lucky. It's not that they're well adapted, it's not that they're attractive and sexy, they're just really lucky, okay? And this often happens in small populations. Okay, so think about this as random in small populations. And I'm going to give you some examples that may make more sense. Okay. Genetic drift. Okay, so here's population 1, our population in time 1. Here's the same population time 2. Was there evolution between here and there? Do we see it? Okay, and let me say that the little marbles represent different alleles. So we have blue or green, yellow, and red alleles. And then over here, do we have evolution?
There's no reds.
Okay, there's no reds. Is there a change in the allele frequency over time? Yeah. Why did that happen? Because here, in between generations, there was a drastic reduction in population. Maybe there was a storm, maybe there was a fire, maybe a bunch of people from Germany got on a boat and came to the United States. Whatever it was, maybe this was several birds got blown off of course, and the rest of the birds stayed where they were. Whatever it was, a small number of lucky individuals make it onto the next population, to the next generation. So why is the red not represented here? Why is red not here? Is it because they couldn't swim fast enough to get out of the bottle? They just were unlucky. It just happens. It's just random chance. But because they weren't here, what do we know? So here's the ones that survived from the parent population. So who are these compared to relative to those?
the offspring.
Yeah, those are the babies of them, right? And because the parents didn't have red allele, then the babies don't have red allele, okay? It's not because red allele is stupid or poop faces or anything like that. It just, they didn't make it onto the boat, right? And we see this a lot with population. Good example here, we go from, this is what are these, elephant seals, and they live out on the Pacific coast, from like San Francisco down to the Baja of Mexico, and they are big, they are slow, and they're tasty. What happens to big, slow, tasty animals?
Have you eaten?
So we go from huge population all through here, but there were some that lived out on an island in the middle of the ocean, Guadeloupe. Okay? They didn't get eaten, right? Why did they not get eaten? Because they were like ninjas and like were able to defend themselves. Or they were faster than the other ones. Why did they not get
Their
eaten?
brothers on the island.
They were just lucky, right? They just found themselves on the island. It wasn't like pre-planning. They're like, oh, here comes the European people with their guns. It was, well, we're just lucky we're out here. So we go from a big population down to a small population, and then we said we're going to protect them. Then all the individuals from Guadeloupe, and sometimes we even take some and move them back over here. Well, look at natural wildlife biology. This is like a really common story. There's almost no deer left. Actually, that happened in the south. There were no deer in Georgia. So we go to Michigan and get deer and bring them down here. Right? But once you go back to a big population, we've lost alleles because not every allele was represented on these few individuals on Guadeloupe. Right? Big population, small population, back to big, we lose alleles. Okay, does that make sense? And finally, the most important one, okay? And I think this is the one that most people sort of can relate to. And when you think of evolution, you think of natural selection. But as I think I've shown, there are other ways that genetics change, okay? So there's artificial selection, okay? That is breeders picking and choosing, and then there's natural selection, nature picking and choosing. We're talking about this at a family gathering the other day. Here's a great example of artificial selection. I don't know if you guys have ever seen these. You can now buy foxes as pets.
I thought they were still illegal in this state.
Yeah, they may be illegal in Georgia, but these were created by Russians, right? Radical liberals and Russians. No, and so what they did, they had a farm that they were getting these Arctic, or I think they're Arctic or southern foxes for fur. And these people had a question, scientists, they said, can we select a new breed of dogs? So they have all their foxes, they go along, they put their hand in there, if the fox bites them, they're killed. If they put their hand in the next one, the fox is not aggressive, they take that fox and it's a winner, right? All the aggressive ones get removed, all of the more docile ones get retained in the population. You breed those, you go to the next generation, you do this for like 4, 5, 8 generations, and now you have foxes that wag their tail, they lick your face, they're not aggressive, they listen to your call, right? So that is a picking and choosing who has the opportunity to breed and alter the future generations. Okay, that's how we've gotten all of our domesticated animals. Right? But natural selection is similar, right? Very similar. And if these three things, these three conditions occur, natural selection will happen. Okay? Number one, is, number one, is if there is variation occurs. In the population. Okay. So that is to say, members of the population differ in some kind of characteristic. Okay. Number two, variation is heritable, right? And what does that mean? What is the ultimate source of this variation we're talking about?
You pass down.
Okay, it's inherited, it's passed down, and how is it passed down?
Through mating.
Through mating, right? I'll just draw because nobody wants to talk about sperm. Here it is, it's in the sperm, it's in the egg, right? Sperm plus egg equals baby. The variation is coded in the DNA. It's those alleles we've been talking about. They're created by mutation. Those alleles are this variation that we're talking about. Okay? Now there is variation that's not heritable, right? Can just be environmental. Could be the hair, like I cut my hair short. Some people grow it out and fold it over. There's all different things like tattoos, not tattoos, clothing. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about any kind of variation that is encoded in your DNA. And then number three, last year,
Thank you.
variation. I don't know how I want to say this. The variation alters reproductive success. So I guess the easy way of saying this is your DNA partly determines how many babies you can have, how many babies you have. I don't know. Pretty simple. Okay, so meaning if you have more babies than I do, and that's because of your alleles, right? Then what do we know about that allele? It's just going to get more and more and more and more common. Okay? If these three things happen, the population will evolve by nature of natural selection. Okay? And do these things, would everyone agree that these things happen? Right? This is the most common way that populations evolve and change over time. Here's a little example. Number one, what are we seeing in this panel? Okay, so we're seeing variability. There's an allele for light colored and an allele for dark colored. This is, you can't really see it in here, but assume that if a mother mouse with white genes has a baby, her offspring will more likely be white. Why? Because it's heritable trait. What's going on here? We can see that the hawk has eaten a mouse, and what color mouse is it?
Why?
Why?
It's easier to see on the background.
Okay, so you're more obvious on the white background, so therefore, now what do we know about the reproductive success of that mouse right there?
It was something that there's a white gene.
Probably not gonna be real high, right? Unless it like somehow like jettison some babies out right here. Probably not gonna survive long enough to reproduce, okay? So what do you know about future populations? And this allele specifically?
Why the little decreases?
If you don't have if you don't have the opportunity to survive long enough to mate, your alleles don't get passed on, future generations will not have your allele as frequently. Okay. This is very intuitive. I think that everyone's like, oh yes, of course, right? Of course, we know it gets a little more complicated because we know that this individual may have a white allele too, but maybe the darkest dominant. Right? It gets a little bit more complicated, but for now, that's what we're talking about, natural selection. Okay, and this is to me a really cool example of this, and goes back to even what we talked about with the DNA. Okay, remember we talked about DNA, mRNA, proteins folding. Here's a protein. This is a big protein. It's called the MCR protein. Yeah. No, MC1R. What does the protein do? It's the melanocortin melanocortin receptor. Okay. So what is this protein? It either transports melanin to the outside of the cell and makes you look like this, or it doesn't transport melanin and you look like that at the top. Okay? So you either are dark colored or you're light colored. Same, guess what? It's the same system in humans, right? Humans have a variety of different melanin in their skin. Okay? Why would this be adaptive? Right, so if you live out in New Mexico, and I've been to these places, you can be walking through the desert and you're on a lava flow. Then you walk a little bit further and it's white sand. Right there, it's dark. Right here, it's light. Okay? And so we know, obviously, that these individuals will be more adapted to this environment. Those individuals will be more adapted to the light colored environment. But the amazing thing is, we now can tell exactly which amino acids change in order to change the phenotype. All right? So we can look at exactly which three-letter nucleotide. What are those called? Anyways, yeah. So this is a cool example that we're now understanding exactly which part of the DNA is involved with the phenotypic change, and it's pretty neat. And the same gene is involved in all three of these different species. Mutations in those genes in all three of those species. Okay. Cane toads, invasive species introduced to Australia. Okay. We'll say this is Australia now. They were introduced, one little spot over here. They have been, say that was 1940 maybe, and then 1950, 60, 70, they just keep invading more and more areas. Right? The amazing thing is they've seen evolution because these individuals out here in the 60s, 70s, 80s are the great-great-great-great-grandparents of these individuals, right? But we know that they have evolved and are different right, than the ones that were originally introduced. We know that these have longer legs. They are genetically programmed to move more. They are more poisonous than the ones that were originally introduced, right? Which makes sense because if you move faster, you're the one more likely to disperse. If you're more poisonous, then you're more likely to survive, to adapt to your environment, right? Pretty amazing. We can see this evolution within lifetimes, human lifetimes. We're seeing evolution of the COVID virus. We see evolution of drug-resistant bacteria, right? They're adapting to the introduction of antibiotics, right? Evolution is everywhere. It's a very important topic in zoology. Okay, so what we're going to talk about next time is how and when two populations evolve into new species, okay? We're gonna sort of go back to our discussion of phylogenies and these branchings, right? That's really what we're talking about here, is this splitting. Right? Two populations diverge from each other through natural selection or genetic drift, right? At what point did they become so different that they split on our phylogeny? Okay? And so that's what we will talk about on Thursday. Yeah,
So it's gonna be like Thursday video lesson.
correct. Yep, I will, I'll record that on Thursday and post that. Just like I'll post this one here today.